Welcome to the Why Not You podcast, where our goal is to inspire, teach, and elevate your personal journey. Our heart-centered guests love sharing some of their life-changing aha moments, hoping that it might be of benefit to you. We welcome you to our show today. And as always, we are excited to share with you insights and wisdom from guests from all sorts of backgrounds, professions, and experiences. Today is no different. Dan Armstrong is an author, international street performer, magician, and speaker, just to name a few. But what distinguishes Dan are not these life skills, but his story on how he got here and how he overcame adversity. Dan, welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your schedule to share with our audience some of your very vulnerable things that you've had to deal with in your life.
Thank you, Glade. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here with you. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, thank you again. And I'd like to get right into it, Dan. Before we get into the meat of the discussion, though, tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what it was like at the Armstrong household.
That's a loaded question. I was born during the Vietnam War. So growing up in that period, my parents really kept up on the news. And I remember we would be driving somewhere and my dad would pull over and pick up a hitchhiker, and it'd be a uniformed soldier. My mom and dad honored the soldiers regardless of the popularity of the war at the time. They were always willing to give someone a ride, give someone a hand up, shake somebody's hand, give someone a hug. They were truly examples of love that just really made the deepest impact you can imagine, especially when you're a youngster at that time period in our history. So that's just one of the fascinating things. When I think back about my childhood, what I saw and what I was involved in historically, but also just the idea that parents have such a huge impact on us that still, I think the vibrations reverberate today with who I am and how I actually interact with life. Yeah, we traveled a lot. We had a singing group. We made an album in 1976 and traveled all over the country. So it was not uncommon for us to see just such a varied culture of people, not just those around in our small community of Lancaster County.
So Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
You can say it that way. It's funny when people are outside Lancaster, they say Lancaster or whatever. And we know they're not from the area when they don't say,
well, I'm not.
Lancaster.
Well, that's great. So were you more of a blue collar, white collar? What was it like at the Armstrong place there growing up?
My father was part of a company that his dad started called Edward Armstrong and Sons. And they did septic tanks. They put in drain fields. They had portable toilets. So it was a dirty business. It was a smelly business. My dad was blue collar, but I often called him brown collar because he stank when he came home. And ironically, I went into the business over summers to help. But yeah, it was a brown or blue collar. There I go again, brown collar business. And my dad worked very hard to provide his family, did not make a lot of money. My dad went up to the 8th grade and then left right after that, never went to high school, but could read and write and reason. And I always thought of him as street smart.
Gotcha.
And he really loved people. And because of that, people respected him. My mother also went up to the 10th grade and she left school. Now, she was from Midwest Iowa. And she did go back and get her GED when one of my older brothers was graduating from high school. So they both graduated the same year.
Oh, that's cool. Good.
My brother and my mother.
Good for her. Good for her. Well, yeah. Dan, your story really kind of begins at birth, doesn't it?
Yes, of course. Don't we all?
Well, that's true. That's true.
We were all born at a very young age.
That's true. But tell us a little bit about what happened at birth for you.
Well, I am the fourth of 5, and I was born with a cleft palate. So it was very difficult for my mother to feed me. Obviously, with a cleft palate, there was a hole in the roof of a mouth that everything I would eat would go right up through my nose. So for the first few years, it was very tough to even get the nourishment I needed, and I was often very sick. I would catch colds and flus and spend a lot of time away from other kids. But eventually, when I was 5 or 6, we had already been visiting the Lancaster Cleft Palate Clinic, and it was founded by a man named Dr. Cooper. But the world famous Dr. Muhammad Mazahari was the doctor there at the time. And I always like to say he watched me grow up and I watched him grow old. And he was an amazing man. And he built this prosthesis. They did an operation on me when I was, I think, 2, but it couldn't fix the problem. So he built a prosthesis. It was a plastic prosthesis with a bulb in the back that would block the hole that they couldn't close in surgery. So it made it a lot easier to eat. But then I had to learn how to speak because I couldn't speak. Really, I didn't speak much until I was 5 or 6 years old, not like most children. You couldn't understand me anyway.
Right. And then there was something that happened in the 3rd grade, if I remember right, that really it was a transformative experience. You mind sharing with that?
Sure. When I recall this incident, I am actually shocked at how this little boy could overcome this, but yet he did. So there I was on the playground in elementary school, and I had my little fingers around the backstop, the metal chain link fence, while some kids were playing kickball. And I didn't hear these kids coming up behind me, but it was a group of, I believe they were 3rd graders, and I was in 2nd grade or something of that nature. And they grabbed me from behind and they threw me down on the dirt. Well, whether they tried it or not, they landed me on a pile of ants and a large ant hill. And they started making fun of me, spitting on me, holding my hands behind my head, saying, spell your name, spell your name. Well, my last name is Armstrong, so I complied, Armstrong. However, it would come across as Armstrong. Very nasal, very air-filled, because I couldn't pronounce, even after these few years of using a prosthesis, there still was a gap. So my speech was very impeded, not like any other child that could just pronounce any consonant, any vowel. That wasn't something that came easy for me. I was still struggling with it. So they held me down and they made me spell my name over and over, spitting on me. And of course, I was getting very upset and began to cry. Well, little did I know these ants were making their way inside my clothing, under my shirt, up my sleeves, down into my hip area, and they were biting me. Well, eventually a playground teacher called, break it up, boys, break it up. And of course, they broke it up. And I stood up and ran to her side because, oh my gosh, I have somebody that's going to be my hero, going to save me. And I ran to her. In the meanwhile, just rubbing down my body because these ants are biting me. I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea what was happening under my clothing. Well, I get to her and I'm ready for her to comfort me. And she says instead, what is wrong with you? Are you retarded? And I was just shocked, just right to the core, that I was going to someone who would rescue me, and instead they were beating me up even more.
Was it because you were dusting ants off on her, or was it just her just being crazy?
She knew who I was. She knew who I was. I didn't write this in the story that came out in the book, but she knew who I was. The teachers knew who I was. It was probably just a difficult time for them as well, trying to understand children with deficiencies. But they took me into the nurse's office and called my mother, and she came and got me. And she was pretty upset because she heard the story and brought me home, put me in a bath of Epsom salt so the wounds would start to heal. And my mother, I remember her telling me there were hundreds of bites all over my neck, my back, and my hip area. And she said to me, Danny, you are special. And God made you this way so that you can help others who are special as well.
Wow.
And I'll never forget that.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did that feel to you at that point? I mean, just hearing those words, I'm sure you were probably still sobbing and just hurting in every way possible.
Yeah, I think the old adage, sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but words can never harm me, is absolutely false. Words do hurt. Words go deep. I mean, those guys could have hit me with sticks and stones, and I probably wouldn't remember that. But I still remember the words. The words dig deep. The words can hurt. The words can harm. But words can help and they can heal if we use them properly. And I think from that time, as you asked, yes, it was a tragedy. It was definitely a pain in my life. It was a struggle. But in time, I learned that, struggles can become our strengths. Tragedies can become our triumphs. And our pain can actually become a passion. I mean, think about a little boy who can't even hardly speak and has spoken now to hundreds, thousands of people over the course of the last, since I've been alive.
Well,
how could I do that?
That's amazing. But that just didn't happen overnight. I mean, Dan, you said that you were an angry child, often sick and fearful of meeting new people. And this went on for years. So how did you, how did you work through that? I mean, those words, I'm sure they reverberated in your mind over and over and over again. And
they still do, but they're not hurtful anymore. They've given me a platform to work off of. So, when I was maybe, again, I told you my family sang, so we traveled across the United States, and they would put me on the stage, put me in front of hundreds of people at campgrounds and churches and farm shows, and I would sing a song by myself, and it was like my parents didn't even see the cleft palate and the deficiency of who I was as a problem. It was like, what are you talking about? This is who you are. You are not that. You are Dan. These are your talents. So the more they got me in front of people, now, mind you, crowds, not individuals. Individuals, that took a long time to relate to individuals and to be confident enough to speak to someone.
Did you resist that at all, Dan?
In front of audiences. You know what? I didn't. And I think because I was part of the crew. I mean, my siblings were standing beside me the whole time. So I was never alone. And then I got involved in school plays. When I was 13, I was in junior high. I tried out for a school play and I got the lead role. And I didn't get it because of my great voice. I got it because I was so dramatic. I was able to capture the audience's attention using my body language, not my words. And the English teacher that gave me the role told me that many years later. I said, why did you give me this role when I was talking like, I don't know, give me a script. Is there anyone out there who wants to join my club? What kind of a teacher would give someone that role? But I would say something like, is there anyone that would join my club? And because of that that emphasis on my language, I was enrolled in 8 more school plays. So eventually, the anger of being put down by individuals was reversed by being applauded by crowds, by groups of people. So I realized that I am overcoming this obstacle because I've given an arena, I've been given a stage to exercise the very thing that I feared, and that was speaking in public.
So that
was a long answer.
Well, no, but that's what we don't talk about nowadays is the struggle.
Yeah.
We don't talk about how hard it is. And we live in a world that just wants an instant fix, a magic pill, an overnight sensation. We want to go to a seminar at a 5-star resort over the weekend and come out a new person. We don't talk. I mean, we're talking 3rd grade. So that's 9-ish. And now you're in high school. That's 8 years of struggle and evolution.
The other thing was, all during this time up until, all of elementary school. So you imagine 6 years, 7, if you count kindergarten, being taken out of class for speech therapy every other day in front of your classmates. Where are you going? Speech therapy. What? Speech therapy. I couldn't even say it. Speech therapy. Today, Glade, I still wear a steel plate with a bulb in the back to block the air so that I can speak to you. But 30 years ago, I would never have told you that because it would have been an embarrassment.
Hmm.
The obstacle has to be overcome by really looking at it face on and saying, what can I do with this? What can I do with what I have from where I am?
I love that. And so you were pushed on stage, and then you put yourself on
Volunteered.
stage.
Yeah.
So there's an evolution there, right? I mean, you're starting to gain some
Sure.
confidence and overcoming some of those adversities. And I mean, gosh, I just can't imagine how important it was for your parents and your siblings to be there and guide you through this. And then you ultimately probably ended up leading them.
Well, I know out of the 5 siblings group that I have spoken to more audiences consistently over time. I had a radio spot. Well, let me back up. After high school, when I was 18 years old, I was approached by fellow classmates, said, hey, we're starting a band and we need a lead singer. Well, I can sing, but played. I mean, come on, listen to my voice. Can you imagine me singing? But again, I joined this band and we ended up, when I was 20 years old, we ended up getting a contract to do a 3-album contract with a label. And we were in the studio recording this album, our first album, and there was a technical glitch with something. We had gone home for the day or back to the hotel. And the owner of the studio came in to look at this glitch, and the engineer put something on, and the owner of the studio said, who is this? Who are these guys? And he said, oh, they're just a young band from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And he says, I want to talk to these guys. So we came in, he talked to us, and he said, you guys really have a great sound, but you got that garage sound. So we want to sharpen you guys up because we think you have some potential here. Well, they put some money behind that first album and it just skyrocketed. I mean, we were all over the country doing concerts, again, in front of college audiences to festivals, 6,000 people, 10,000 people. Somebody caught a picture of me on the AP press with my arms up, screaming out to the audience, in a microphone, and sent it to me from Texas. And I was like, what? I had no idea how popular our band was.
Well,
we were all over the country.
Damascus?
Canada. Yeah, this is Damascus.
I mean, for those people that don't know Damascus, I mean, it ages me, but that was a legit band. And you were the lead singer for Damascus. YouTube it, you youngsters. YouTube Damascus. Saturday Morning Cartoons was the song I wrote and recorded on the album. I helped write one other song on the album, and the other songs were written by Doug Longenecker, who was also a lead singer, and then Dwayne Smoker, who played the keyboards. But Saturday Morning Cartoons was the most played song on radio since our band broke up. You ready? In 1987. It's still being played today on some stations by request. Saturday Morning Cartoons by Damascus. And it is one of those songs. It's just about cartoons and how they mess with your minds. And it was kind of an analogy for the day, an analogy for all of us to be careful what we see and interpret as reality. Only I put it in the cartoon context. But I was on stage all over the country doing this stuff. And I gained incredible amount of confidence. And, when I met you out in Texas and Kyle Wilson interviewed me, an important, I think, analogy to how I speak is there is almost like a separate Dan Armstrong standing behind me, looking down at the vernacular, the vocal expression of what I'm trying to say and piecing the consonants together so they come out correctly. You do it naturally. Your audience probably does it naturally. I don't. Literally, even now, I'm seeing the words before I speak them and try to pronounce them correctly so you can understand what I'm saying. And that's happened all my life. Gotcha. Interesting.
So it's a whole different way of communicating that I don't think most people understand, that people with speech impediments are thinking about probably all the time.
There's no question that there's so many things that we take for granted. And what I liked about what you wrote in the book, Think Big, you said, we all seem to harbor in secret pain, broken hearts, or deformed bodies. But you have shared with us a little bit about how you rose above that and worked through it. And again, that's something that we don't talk about enough, is how we can use adversity and challenge and hurt and pain as a way to learn. And what are we supposed to learn from that? And how can we then work through that and evolve or become and do? I mean, what you're talking about is overcoming a challenge. I mean, a really difficult challenge. And then it became the foundation of who you became, what you're doing, the lives that you're touching.
Sure, it was great. And, as you mentioned, I wrote a chapter in the book, Think Big. I've written 2 other books, but I didn't just write the books overnight. Like you say, you go to a hotel and you come out and you're a superstar. I started writing as a child because I couldn't talk as well as other children. I would write stories. I wish I had them. I don't know what happened to them over time, but I remember writing little, 1,000 word little children book stories about myself or about the neighbor, about a little car. I just remember doing this and losing it all. But writing became an outlet of my struggle. Writing became a way to express myself when the voice could not do it. The words on paper became a expression of maybe a soul that was hurt, maybe a heart that was hindered. And the letters became my voice. And what was interesting was when I talked about the band, when I left the band, I got married a year later, and a radio station that was playing our songs, the manager, his name's Fred McNaughton, called me up and he said, Dan, I remember you in the band. You always told these little stories. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind coming on air and you could maybe do a couple of those stories, maybe like a minute long, and like pre-record them. And I said, yeah, that's a great idea. So I went back and I just sat down and I thought about some of the short little stories. And I wrote 10 1-minute stories real quick to be played on the radio station. Well, they got such positive feedback. He called me up and says, hey, Dan, we played your, what we called the wacky words of Dan Armstrong, 1 minute right after the weather at 8:20 p.m. every night, Monday through Friday. We'd like you to do some more. So I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll write 10 more. So I'm thinking maybe I'll write 10 or 20 of these things. Well, I ended up writing 1,000 1-minute radio spots. Not only did I hone in on my skills as a writer to basically tell a story with impact within 60 seconds, but I also had to record my voice that would be broadcast to thousands of people every day. So here's this little boy at this backstop being ripped away from a secure world to being bullied and mocked to a guy who's on the radio purposely, voluntarily speaking to audiences. The transformation, and by the way, Glade, this was about 20 years after that event that the radio spot started. So again, not
20
overnight.
20 years. 20
years. And are you ready for this? Another 20 years would pass before my first book was written. 20 years. The Adventures of a Real Life Cable Guy was written right before I turned 50 years old.
Kudos to you, Dan. That is amazing. And I hope that our audience is gleaning some of the wisdom and the grit and determination that you had to have had, how you turned a so-called deficiency into a platform that you can speak your voice and be the true, authentic Dan Armstrong.
Talking about being authentic, I mean, and I mentioned earlier that 20 years ago, I would have never told you that I had a steel plate. I may have said, I was born with a cleft palate. But over the last 20 years, with new audiences, speaking, when I'm hired to go out and speak, it's one of those things, I think, that when you are aware of who you are in the audience's eyes, you have a way to be more impactful that you may have never seen before, because you're trying to put on this mask. When people don't want masks anymore, what they want is an authentic, real person who has struggled that they can identify with. And when they identify with you, then you've got some credibility. And from there on, once you've established credibility and that validity of who you are in their lives, that's when the impact really happens. And that could be the 20-year journey I came from, the 40-year journey, and now almost the 60-year journey of muddling through this thing we call life with a defect that's actually has been a gift. A gift. I get to give it to everyone. That's wonderful. I'm glad I was born this way. I wouldn't be who I am without this gift.
And that is so vulnerable to share that with folks and to realize that, you know what, we aren't in a perfect world. No one's perfect. Everyone has something, like you said, a secret pain, a broken heart, a deformed body, a challenge, something.
Yeah.
Everyone, every one of us. And what we do with those is the key. Do we curl up in the fetal position and give up, or do we work through it?
Right.
That's the making of character. And I think that's what people are looking for, is true, authentic character. And you exemplify that, Dan. You exemplify that.
Thank you, Glade. I appreciate that. I think it's important for us to be careful of maybe extolling ourselves, but also being able to share, as you use the word vulnerable, in such a way that we're not being arrogant or proud, but we're being confident that we have gone through something. And we are confident that we have strategies and principles that can be shared to help other people. Basically, the theme of what I've spoken on for years, I just spoke at a retirement community 2 weeks ago, 55 and above. And I was talking about the theme, be aware of your presence in the lives of other people. Be aware of who you are while you're in the life of other people. A man came up to me afterwards. He was 82 years old. And he says, I thought my life was over. I'm 82 years old. What do I have to give? But after your speech, it made me realize that I have to be aware of the world around me and be willing to serve if I can. I thought to myself, here I am, young enough to be this man's son. He's old enough to be my father. And he had given up, but he said he had a new purpose. He had something new to shoot for. That when he would go to the store, or he loved the hardware store, that he would look for people who are in need. The Girl Scout cookies. Okay, buy 2 boxes. Give them away if you can't eat them. And the story of being aware of your presence in the lives of other people has been a theme of my life because of what I went through. Maybe I can help that little boy who's laying on the ground with ants crawling in through his clothing. Maybe I can be the one who can pick up that hitchhiker and take them somewhere they need to be. Maybe I can be the one to help the homeless person. Maybe I can be the one to knock on the door of the street in the city of Lancaster and say, I have some food for you. You need some for the holidays. And I participated in those activities time and time again, not to glorify myself, but because I have had to walk through some tragedy, some struggle, some pain, some obstacles. And because of that, I know everybody else out there has a different one to a different measure, but may need to be called out to help them. And that is what we're here to do, Glade. I think that we're here to be aware of who we are in the lives of other people so that we may serve with every talent and with every ounce of our being, so that when we lay our head down to rest at the end of our life, when we take the last breath, that we can say, I did what I could with what I had from where I was.
Well, I echo your mom's words. You are somebody, Dan. You're an inspiration to me. You're an inspiration, I'm sure, to many who are listening today. And thank you so much for sharing some of this insight, some of this wisdom, some of this just tough experiences that you've enjoyed along the way.
Thank you, Glade. We all have something to offer.
That's true. We do. We absolutely do. And as my favorite book says in Matthew 25, it talks about the talents. It talks about the talents. And it doesn't matter if we 2x, 5x, or 10x the talents, as long as we grow, as long as we multiply. And
Yep.
and that's what you're saying. You know, at 82 years old, he still has value. He still can give. He can still use those talents and gifts that have been given and make a difference. And when we hide those talents, when we bury them and we don't move forward, that's when we get in trouble.
I don't know how much time we have left, Glade, but I'd like to tell you a very short story. Would
Go
that
ahead.
be all right? You brought up Matthew 25. On the headstone of my parents' gravestone, it says they lived Matthew 25:40, which is, whatsoever you do unto the least of my brethren, so you do it unto me. Years ago, we went shopping in Philadelphia, and there's a long story. It's actually coming up in another book coming out in December. So I'm not going to tell the whole story. But the premise was that my mother went out of her way to help a homeless woman. And it had such an impact on me that I emulated that lifestyle from then on. In my book, The Adventures of a Real Life Cable Guy, I have a story where I reach out to someone. That story has impacted so many people that my children are now doing the same thing. You spoke of the talents. My mother had a talent. It expanded into my life. I have a talent. It has now expanded into my children and their friends and their associates, their culture. No matter what seed we sow, it will bear fruit. The question is, what kind of seeds do we sow? James 4:14 is my actual favorite verse of all time because it kind of hits me right in the face when it comes to thinking about who we are in our world. And that verse is James 4:14 says, our lives are but a mist. They are a vapor. They appear for a while and then they are gone. And my short lifetime here, I've realized now that I've lived probably over half of my life, perhaps maybe 3/4. And it went by so fast. So it makes me realize, hey, what am I going to do with the rest of what I have? That hourglass is turned upside down now. There's only so much sand left in the top part. So I have a responsibility to take what I have, to sow it into this world, to be who I was supposed to be, and get off this, any kind of a platform where I feel like I need a pity party, and instead give. So. People need you. People need you, Glade. They need people in your audience to just live their lives in front of other people, be aware of who they are, and give to others without recompense, without the idea that they deserve something in return. Because someday your legacy is all that will matter when someone says your name. Thanks, Glade, for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dan, for taking the time to be with us today and sharing your story. It will be an inspiration, and I'm sure there will be many others that will be touched by your resilience, your heart, and the things that you shared with us today. So thank you. I want to end with one last question. What has been your best practice, your secret sauce, if you will, to develop the right mindset, a clear vision, and then the habits to persist?
Let me start by saying that one of the key phrases that has meant a lot to me that I've actually been living but didn't know it, but someone put it in the verbiage where I can actually read it. And that is, what can I do with what I have from where I am? Now, what that does is take out that nasty habit that a lot of us have called comparison. We see someone and we say, oh, I'll never be like that, but we admire them. We want to be like them. We respect them. But for some reason, we think we have to measure up to what they have done. And by doing so, we take away the value of our contribution. So the question is, what can I do with what I have from where I am. And if I'm not in a financial position to invest in gold, silver, real estate, crypto, whatever that would make a name for myself in that industry, I feel bad. No, maybe that's not who you're supposed to be. You are supposed to be the best version of yourself. You are designed and created to be you. So why we compare ourselves to other is one of the it's a very destructive habit. It's actually a mindset that is destructive. So I'm going to go back to that question one more time. What can I do with what I have from where I am? So that's number one. Obviously, I touched on comparison. Don't compare yourself to others. Be the best version of who you were meant to be. For me, I have learned that I'm not a bad writer. I'm not the best, but I'm not a bad writer. I just finished a novel in October. I sold 1,000 copies in 93 days. It took 4 years for my first book to hit 1,000 sales. This one did 1,000 in 93 days. So I realized that, wow, my passion to write is who I am. Now, I'm not going to be a James Michener. I'm not going to be I should have looked in my library before I thought of that.
And John Grisham.
I'm not going to be, there you go. I'm not going to be those guys. So, but I'm going to be the best Dan Armstrong. And that takes a lot of pressure off yourself. When you don't have to live in the shoes of someone else. And here's what I found very interesting. You asked that question about secret sauce. I was at a get-together. It was in March in Dallas at the Kyle Wilson Inner Circle. And I was new. And there was about 35, 40 people in the room. And I'm looking around the room and I'm thinking success, success. So all these successful people. And then Kyle asks this question, is there some arena in your life that you need help in? And we're going to do these hot seats. So someone volunteered and said, yeah, I have a relation problem. And they gave this heart story. And it just broke my heart to hear this person with this story. And I'm thinking, holy crap, I have a phenomenal marriage of 33 years. And this person, their marriage is breaking up. So they're not as successful as I thought they were in the sense that they had everything together. They were having a real problem. Next person, well, I have a problem with self-esteem. What? How could you have a problem with self-esteem? Because mine's not bad. I mean, I have some problems once in a while, but man. And as we went around the room, I realized that no matter what we label people as successful, they have their own demons to fight. They have their own struggles to overcome. I was just humbled by these great people that had some grave problems in their life that they had to deal with. So when you idolize someone, realize that they may be idolizing you. You might be the one that they're looking at for whatever reasons, that you have a great marriage, that you have your house is paid off, your car's paid off, or maybe you just have a fantastic relationship with your daughters, your children. See, some people don't have that. They may have something else that you want. So you got to stop this nonsense of wanting what other people have when really you should be grateful for what you have, not for what you don't have.
Love that. Love that. Well, Dan, thank you so much again for spending time with us today and sharing with us your heartfelt wisdom and advice and counsel and your story. I learned a long time ago, facts tell, stories sell. And yours is a compelling story, and I know it's going to help people along the way. So, Dan, how do people get in touch with you? How do they find, Dan Armstrong, the books that you've written, the cable guy? I mean, the stories of a cable guy. I mean, there's got to be some interesting stories of 20 some odd years of going into the households of cable stories and whatnot. How do they get a hold of that book?
Yeah, the 2 books I've written solely are on Amazon. The Adventures of a Real Life Cable Guy And if you go to that and you click on that book, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see the other book, Smart Dust, The Dawn of Transhumanism. Or if you just go to Amazon and look up Smart Dust, The Dawn of Transhumanism, you can find it there, and then scroll down and find the adventures of a real life cable guy. So they're attached to each other in that way.
Awesome. And then for speaking engagements and whatnot, do you have a website that people can contact you through?
At this time, they could go to my Facebook page, Dan Armstrong, and look for my ugly. Well, you don't have my face on this podcast. They can't see me. So I'm a bald guy with some glasses. How's that? They could email me at danarmstrongauthor@gmail.com. And we're working on a new website for the 2 books and then speaking engagement information at this time.
Awesome.
And so I hope that helps. But danarmstrongauthor@gmail.com, they can contact me there, or go to Amazon and look up both of those titles.
And we'll put some information in our footnotes so people can get a hold of you as well. Thank you so much, Dan, for being with us today.
Thank you, Glade. My pleasure, sir.
We'd like to thank our guests for sharing a part of their experience with us on this episode of Why Not You? Also, we'd like to thank Mix It 6 Studios for producing, editing, mixing, and creating our great music for this podcast. But most importantly, we'd like to thank you for listening. Be sure to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode of Why Not You? See you next time.